From Appendix A to The Lord of the Rings, here follows the account of Helm Hammerhand, King of Rohan, and the story modern writers have decided to improve, because no, dumb hubristic cash grabbing is not limited to Amazon. Of the kings of the Mark between Eol and Theoden, most is said of Helm Hammerhand. He was a grim man of great strength. There was at that time a man named Freke, who claimed descent from King Freyrwine, though he had, men said, much Dunlendish blood and was dark-haired. He grew rich and powerful, having wide lands on either side of the Adorn. Near its source, he made himself a stronghold and paid little heed to the king. Helm mistrusted him, but called him to his councils, and he came when it pleased him. To one of these councils, Freke rode with many men, and he asked the hand of Helm's daughter for his son Wulf. But Helm said, "You have grown big since last you were here, but it is mostly fat, I guess." And men laughed at that, for Freke was wide in the belt. Then Freke fell in a rage and reviled the king, and said this at the last, "Old kings that refuse a prophet's staff may fall on their knees." Helm answered, "Come, the marriage of your son is a trifle. Let Helm and Freke deal with it later. Meanwhile, the king and his council have matters of moment to consider." When the council was over, Helm stood up and laid his great hand on Freke's shoulder, saying, "The king does not permit brawls in his house, but men are freer outside." And he forced Freke to walk before him out from Edoras into the field. To Freke's men that came up, he said, "Be off, we need no hearers. We are going to speak of a private matter alone. Go and talk to my men." And they looked and saw that the king's men and his friends far outnumbered them, and they drew back. "Now, Dunlending," said the king, "you have only Helm to deal with, alone and unarmed. But you have said much already, and it is my turn to speak. Freke, your folly has grown with your belly. You talk of a staff. If Helm dislikes a crooked staff that is thrust on him, he breaks it. So, with that he smote Freke such a blow with his fist that he fell back stunned and died soon after. Helm then proclaimed Freke's son and near kin the king's enemies, and they fled, for at once Helm sent many men riding to the west marches. 4 years later, great troubles came to Rohan, and no help could be sent from Gondor, for 3 fleets of the Corsairs attacked it, and there was war on all its coasts. At the same time, Rohan was again invaded from the east, and the Dunlending, seeing their chance, came over the Isen and down from Isengard. It was soon known that Wulf was their leader. They were in great force, for they were joined by enemies of Gondor that landed in the mouths of the Leftwee and Isen. The Rohirrim were defeated and their land was overrun, and those who were not slain or enslaved fled to the dales of the mountains. Helm was driven back with great loss from the crossings of Isen and took refuge in the Hornberg and the ravine behind, which was after known as Helm's Deep. There he was besieged. Wulf took Edoras and sat in Meduseld and called himself king. There Haleth, Helm's son, fell, last of all defending the doors. Soon afterwards the long winter began, and Rohan lay under snow for nearly 5 months, November to March. Both the Rohirrim and their foes suffered grievously in the cold and in the dearth that lasted longer. In Helm's Deep there was great hunger after Yule, and being in despair against the king's counsel, Hammer, his younger son, led men out on a sortie and foray, but they were lost in the snow. Helm grew fierce and gaunt for famine and grief, and the dread of him alone was worth many men in defense of the burg. He would go out by himself, clad in white, and stalk like a snow troll into the camps of his enemies, and slay many men with his hands. It was believed that if he bore no weapon would bite on him. The Dunlending said that if he could find no food, he ate men. That tale lasted long in Dunland. Helm had a great horn, and soon it was marked that before he sallied forth he would blow a blast upon it that echoed in the deep. And then so great a fear fell on his enemies that instead of gathering to take him or kill him, they fled away down the coombe. One night, men heard the horn blowing, but Helm did not return. In the morning there came a sun gleam, the first for long days, and they saw a white figure standing still on the dike, alone, for none of the Dunlendings dared come near. There stood Helm, dead as a stone, but his knees were unbent. Yet men said that the horn was still heard at times in the deep, and the wraith of Helm would walk among the foes of Rohan and kill men with fear. Soon after the winter broke. Then Freylaf, son of Hild, Helm's sister, came down out of Dunharrow, to which many had fled, and with a small company of desperate men he surprised Wulf in Meduseld and slew him, and regained Edoras. There were great floods after the snows, and the Vale of Entwash became a vast fen. The eastern invaders perished or withdrew, and there came help at last from Gondor by the roads both east and west of the mountains. Before the year was ended, the Dunlendings were driven out even from Isengard, and then Freylaf became king. Helm was brought from the Hornberg and laid in the 9th mound. Ever after the white Cymbalmine grew there most thickly, so that the mound seemed to be snow-clad. When Freylaf died, a new line of mounds was begun. So yeah, I think you'll agree the daughter is the protagonist of this story, right? I mean, she was mentioned all of once. Capitalism has given the world many wonderful things. Collapses in poverty and hunger, more than 4,000 different brands of water, next day delivery on everything from televisions to pianos to Bluetooth-enabled haptic feedback, omni-mobile VR-compatible 3D printed dildos. Buy now with nothing to pay for a year, 15% APR, total customer satisfaction, or your money back. Best of all, capitalism gave us the swing wing.
It's a what?
It's the swing wing. A fun thing. And now it's your favorite store thing.
For a comprehensive list of capitalism's greatest successes, see everything Reddit thinks should be a human right. It's not stealing if you call it socialism. Capitalism does, however, throw up the odd, regrettable conundrum. The concept of intellectual property arose to stop socialists nationalizing good ideas, but its rules and regulations, especially in the realm of copyright law and licensing, and especially as this applies to the arts, occasionally forces something like The Lord of the Rings' War of the Rohirrim into existence. Warner Brothers and New Line have been quite brazen about their motives here. War of the Rohirrim was fast-tracked through greenlighting and production, not because they thought they had a brilliant idea, a film that deserved to be made, a story that had to be told, but because it was a way of ensuring that they retained the rights to, hypothetically, produce something worthwhile in the future. You can't just sit on movie rights, you see. You have to make use of them from time to time. And since we have to make use of them, well, yeah, fuck it. Why don't we just cobble together a script based on an inconsequential paragraph or two of the source materials we own, literally ask our kids to do the screenplay, and fuck it, make it an anime, why not? You don't have to bother with location scouting if your film is just a bunch of fancy storyboards. Kenji Kamiyama, well, he knows what he's doing. Ghost in the Shell standalone complex, that was excellent. So let's bed him into the culture of Western artistic production by keeping the style and stripping away all the thought from creation. Done and dusted in a couple of years. Keep your dirty fingers off our turf, Jeff Bezos, you baldy fuck. There can be only one Lord of the Rings, only one who can adapt these books for film, and he does not share rights. The result is pretty much exactly as you would expect. An occasionally pretty but otherwise bland and pointless affair that underwhelms on its own terms and frustrates when you consider the grander story they might have told had they been bothered. If this stops Bezos's evil eye falling on Rohan for a time, if it halts the shadow of Amazon spreading from the fulfillment center beneath Barad-dûr, then it might loosely be considered worth it. But corporate power plays are a better subject than they are a progenitor of art. For a counterpoint, and this is a shout out, not a sponsor, a friend of this channel, Ian David Diaz, has just released the trailer for the second season of his web series called Rebecca Gold. If you want to see what can be achieved with a shoestring budget and a love of your craft, your characters, and your story, I recommend you go check that out. Rebecca Gold is an assassin and the most prized asset of the sinister company, who have plans for her that she is only beginning to fathom. Her loyalty to her employer is tested when she reacquaints herself with an old flame, forcing her to confront the question, what do you value most, life or love? Season 1 is all available on his Rebecca Gold YouTube channel, and Season 2 should release in the new year. Ian is a lovely and talented guy with a passion for his work. I'm sure he would appreciate the support. The link to his channel is in the description. Now, from something that deserved to be made to something that didn't. Now, as you might have noticed, the canonical material on which this film is drawing is rather brief. It amounts to a couple of pages in the appendices to The Lord of the Rings. And yet War of the Rohirrim is some 2 hours long, and it feels longer still. There are 2 approaches available when you find yourself in need of more material than you have. Either you can do your job as a writer and create compelling stories, or you can just steal somebody else's good work because you're a lazy hack. For the most part, War of the Rohirrim opts for the latter approach. What you're about to see is really just the 2 towers but recast. Helm Hammerhand takes on the role of Theoden. The character Wolf is a mix of Saruman and an Uruk general. The villainous Lord Thorn plays Grima Wormtongue's role. Freylaf is Éomer, and Hera is Éowyn but dialed up to 11. Wherever the film deviates from the appendices, it is usually to replay plot beats from the 2 towers, leading up to and including the battle at Helm's Deep and its conclusion. The old king of Rohan is manipulated and then betrayed by a trusted aide. He banishes his nephew. He leads his people from Edoras to the Hornburg to escape the hordes of darkness, where they are besieged. All Isengard has emptied. The women and children must make for the secret mountain pass. Brave fighters sally out for a last stand. At dawn, look to the east. The nephew who arrives with his loyal forces just in time to lay waste to the enemy. Victory! We have victory! And where the movie deviates from the appendices and from the Two Towers, it is exclusively to big up the character of Hera, whose succession of increasingly outlandish feats ensures that she is the protagonist of the piece, despite the piece featuring Helm Hammerhand and nominally telling the story of how Helm's Deep got its name. You'll reach the end of this movie wondering just why it's called Helm's Deep, given his main role is getting his people into a terrible mess, and the day, and the fortress, and the people of Rohan are saved not by Helm Hammerhand, but by Hera. But Platoon, how can that be so? Surely if Hera were so very important, her name would be known throughout Rohan, perhaps even throughout all Middle-earth. Well, War of the Rohirrim tackles that question head on. You haven't heard of her before because...
By her hand, many great deeds were done, but do not look for tales of her in the old songs. There are none.
Why? Why are there none? The only way there could be none is if Hera, in line with her canonical source, says and does absolutely nothing of note whatsoever, yet by the close of this movie she is one of the most pivotal people in the long history of Rohan. Moreover, we'll close the movie with her being summoned to see actual Gandalf, who has somehow learned that during the course of the movie, some orcs were hunting for some rings in Rohan and he wants to talk to her about it. So simultaneously we are supposed to believe that we have never heard of Hera because there are no songs or tales of her exploits, and yet her exploits are almost unmatched amongst the feats of man. This movie is trying to have it both ways, like it's Justin Trudeau at a frat party.
The girl could ride a horse before she could walk. Wild, some called her, though in truth, he was so proud of his tearaway child.
There is a rather amusing video on YouTube in which Philippa Boyens explains that the writers had no interest in portraying Hera as a warrior princess because they thought that was a tired trope. I found myself recalling this quote when, having seen her best Mooma kill, train eagles, be right about everything, kill trolls, and save Helm's Deep, I watched Hera at the close of the movie taking on and defeating the villain of the piece while wearing a wedding dress. The writers avoided the warrior princess trope like they're Caitlyn Jenner avoiding all those poor people she ran over. At the close of her totally not warrior princess coded introduction, Hera feeds an eagle, and this will become very important later. As for who Hera is beyond her embarrassing list of unforgettable yet somehow forgotten deeds, she has about as much character as anybody else in this movie, which is to say, not a lot. Like Éowyn, she is the only female heir of an old king. She strains against the patriarchal norms of her society. Like Éowyn, she wants to be allowed to fight and prove her worth. Like Éowyn, her dreams are repeatedly dashed by her caring but conservative father. Unlike Éowyn, Hera does not do any of this out of any particular sense of love, whether for her people or for an individual. She doesn't need no man, you see. Unlike Éowyn, her arc does not culminate with her proving her worth as a defender of her people, gaining some new understanding of leadership, proving her qualities as a shield maiden in service of a higher ideal than battlefield glory. Éowyn, after all, closes The Lord of the Rings as the Lady of Ithilien, married to Faramir, mother to Elberon, a life dedicated not to the pursuit of a warrior's renown, but rather to healing and preserving life, because this is more important. This is the lesson she learned. Hera, by contrast, pretty much outdoes Éowyn in every way a warrior can, and her story ends with her being freed of all responsibilities to anybody except herself. She saves the day. She's outright told by all those around her that she should really now rule Rohan, but she turns them down and fucks off to go on a personal adventure. Girls just want to have fun, okay? Why bother growing up when you can remain a child forever? It's such an uplifting modern message. Hera's name evinces a similar lack of care. People have already pointed out that naming a daughter of Rohan after a Greek goddess doesn't quite align with Tolkien's careful study of languages and adherence to their rules and their history.
Well, you brought up Hera is her name in the film.
Hera.
Hera.
Hera. So not like the Greek, no offense, sorry. But not like the Greek goddess. We actually, Fran Walsh named her.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we were stuck. We knew it had to be an H. So Helm, Haleth, Hammer had to be an H. And we got stuck. And then there was a lot of H's that just don't work with it. Yeah. And then Fran said, why don't you name her after our Viking? And she was referring to Hera Helma, who played Hester in Mortal Engines, who is a Viking, a true Viking. Wow. Brilliant Icelandic actress. And as soon as she said, and then I actually went to the Old English, sorry, not Middle English, Old English experts, and it was like, what would you do? How would this be different? And it is Hera. Hera. I can never roll my eyes. It says it, all the actors say it way more beautifully, but it is a beautiful name and actually has the threads, although it's not in fact necessarily a genuinely Old English Anglo-Saxon name, it would kind of mean noble.
You named her after an actress in one of the biggest box office bombs of the modern era. Yet another film Peter Jackson's name was on, but which he couldn't be bothered to direct. It's like if Tolkien was sitting in his study struggling to find a name for one of his elves, and he shrugged and said, fuck it. That Welsh guy in that awful movie I saw last week, that'll do, I'll just take his name. How was this the best you could do for your protagonist? The movie then takes a brief reprieve from sucking its heroine's ladyballs to get a chunk of canonical material out of the way. To Edoras we go, where we first meet Hammer, second son of Helm, who is several years short of twink death. His character has precisely 2 dimensions. He is a sensitive soul, hence his diegetically jarring song.
To wild whispered places she's longing to go. Fearless she rides into the unknown.
And he ever so slightly wants some renown. This is all established very clearly early on in order that a later scene can fail to pay it off properly. When the Dunlendings and their assorted evil allies overwhelm Edoras and the Rohirrim flee to the Hornburg, he does not choose to lay down his life for renown, but rather is forced to do so because his horse has a poorly timed asthma attack. Which means he doesn't so much choose to sacrifice himself and earn his renown, as he has no choice in the matter because he forgot to pack his horse inhaler, and even then he doesn't die, he just gets captured, so that he can be killed in a later scene that pisses off Helm Hammerhand. So yeah, as I say, set up and then improperly paid off. Hammer being the only character, A, not completely full of himself, and B, not being pumped full of the writer's precious bodily fluids, he is the closest thing to a likable person in this entire movie, which makes it a bit of a shame that his arc takes a little tumble off the cliff. We also meet this lady. She's very important. I don't know what her name is. We shall call her Old Leather. Old Leather is the closest thing this movie has to a competent male character, she being a true shield maiden of Rohan and so a glimpse at Hera's future. She is insufferably competent at pretty much everything, is the only person besides Hera who is allowed to be correct, and the two of them elope at the end of the movie, leading you to wonder whether she was also something of a groomer. She informs us that Freka, fattest and second vilest of the Horse Lords, has arrived and called a Witan. The title of vilest must unfortunately go to Helm Hammerhand himself, who really is an insufferable oaf in this movie. Subsequent events are lifted almost word for word from the appendices, but there is a little bit of bespoke writing in the lead-up that is somewhat more than competent.
Fat and prosperous are when men are at the most dangerous, Lord Haleth. It fills them with false courage, and false courage breeds discontent. Which means what? It means Lord Freka has had a long time to think about all the things he doesn't have.
This isn't special, but it is unusually astute for a movie that otherwise disdains thoughtful dialogue, and shows that the movie recognizes, if only for the odd brief moment, that the events spoken of in the appendices require a lot of support work if they are to be turned from anecdote into story. Pared back to its essentials, after all, the appendices description of the movie's inciting event is: Freka arrives and proposes a marriage, Helm calls him fat, they take it outside, Helm becomes One Punch Man. It's not that the appendices give no indication of either man's character or motive, it's that the appendices are necessarily spare in their descriptions. If, spinning this anecdote out into a complete story, you say nothing more than that about the reason these people are here and the character and motives that determine their actions, then the story would seem slightly absurd. As indeed it does, because this scene here is about the only elaboration we get before Helm's fateful punch. Freka benefits from this elaboration, but Helm Hammerhand is badly underserved by the entire movie, so he comes across as inexcusably, even childishly, rash and angry. Almost every single thing he does gets his own people killed, and he never learns from it. Shortly before the fateful fight, we meet this person who is called Leif. He is this movie's Merry to Hera's Eowyn. And we also meet Freylaf, Hera's cousin, and so our discount Eomer. Dollar Store Merry introduces us to the concept of shield maidens, who in this telling were a faction unto themselves with their own history, their own banners, and such.
The shield maidens were women of the borderlands. When all the men were slain, they took up arms and fought. They defended Rohan when no one else could.
Those were darker days. I've long thought it time to retire that banner. I doubt there are any of them left.
They're all gone.
Not all of them.
Please stop hitting, ow, fucking stop hitting me on the nose with it, it's bleeding already. Besides the as you know exposition, and besides the modern elevation of shield maidens to a level that is, as far as I am aware, entirely unsupported by the canon, for the fairly obvious reason that if all the men were gone, then how the hell were any of these people born? This is the first of a few instances where the movie introduces a world state, shield maidens like Entwives are commonly assumed to be extinct, only to contradict it later when everybody knows that old Leza is herself a shield maiden. Helm Hammerhand then enters the scene and Freke enters shortly after, flanked by Dishonored Wolf and this chap whose name is General Targ. Tarkin? Fuck it, we'll just call him Tarkin. Events here proceed mostly in line with the appendices. Freke says hello, Helm calls him fat. The movie does add a note of political intrigue, however, as Freke accuses all and sundry of being loyal to Gondor over Rohan. This is another world state that is contradicted later, when the movie decides that Gondor will not come to Rohan's aid because Helm refuses to light the beacons. The canonical reason for Gondor's absence is that it is too busy battling against the Corsairs of Umbar, and so tied up militarily until the close. But the note of intrigue, which is later abandoned, is here because the marriage proposal is trivial in the appendices, but it is the basis of this movie, and so reasons and grudges are hastily invented, yet not thought through. Consequently, we get a Helm Hammerhand who is accused of being too loyal to Gondor, and who does indeed plan on marrying Hera to a Gondorian prince that we will never meet, suggesting that the accusation is partly justified. Yet later, we get a Helm Hammerhand who doesn't really like Gondor, and who wouldn't countenance asking them for help. This might have been squared had the movie shown Helm needing to live down the accusation, refusing to ask for Gondor's aid in order to shore up support among his own people, some of whom might be wavering, thinking that perhaps Freke had a point after all. But we don't get that because the movie isn't really bothered about making sense. Freke suggests that Hera marry Dishonored Wolf instead, though I must confess I was distracted from his speech by the fact that he seems to have completely lost control of his arms. I am by no means an expert in animation, my editor knows far more about it than I do, I'm sure, but it's one of a disappointingly large number of instances where the animators seem to know about as much about it as I do. I put this down to the fact that the movie was rushed to completion, in which case the fact nobody has bothered to watch it probably counts as a blessing. Anime still hasn't had a real breakthrough moment with mainstream audiences, I don't think, and this movie is much more likely to affirm than it is to dispel unjust prejudices. Freke dutifully recites lines from the appendices, but then tacks on a bit at the end to make sure everybody gets the point he's making.
Old kings that refuse a prophet's staff may fall on their knees. You do not command the loyalty you think you do.
Helm duly suggests they take this outside, while inside, Dishonored Wolf and Hera have a chat about marriage, where we get some more as you know exposition.
Would it be so bad? We were inseparable once.
We were children.
And Hera rejects him. Not because she wants to marry somebody else, but because she's a modern woman and she don't need no man.
You'd rather marry a stranger from Gondor?
I have no thoughts of marriage at all. Our fathers speak as if I were not even in the room. This should be my decision to make. It should be yours too.
What if I told you this is what I want? What I've always wanted? I love you.
No. I do not want to marry you. I do not want to marry any man.
But she's totally not a warrior princess, guys. Nope, no sorry, she's not a warrior princess. She's, a battle queen. This scene is, though, very important because it establishes that Wulf is an incel, which is then compounded when he sees Helm one-punch his oath of a father. Helm then banishes Wulf and his people, and then we get a nice little time passes montage. Actual Éowyn from the actual good movies tells us via narration that Hera feels a little bit sorry for Wulf because they used to be friends, you see, and we get a quick flashback where not a warrior princess child Hera beats Wulf in a sword fight. Sorry as she feels for him after his banishment, she never thinks it might be worth raising the matter with her father, because that would require that we have a dialogue scene when what the movie really wants to do is... That's right, we're doing Lord of the Rings Beast Wars now. That surprisingly long moment where War of the Rohirrim gives up any pretense at being a serious movie and instead wastes an inordinate amount of time pitting various of Middle-earth's larger fauna against each other. Hera is out riding one day with Budget Merry, Discount Éomer, and Old Leather, and then we lapse into peak, and then storytelling. They are riding, and then Crabine from Dunland, and then a Mumakil shows up. Spinning! And then she ran as fast as she could. And that's when things got knocked into 12th gear. A Watcher in the Water is also in the movie, and it tentacle attacks the Mumakil, and then it eats it. And you better bet your bottom dollar this warrior knows how to handle Princess. In Rabid Mumakil Watcher in the Water Invasion Warrior Princess, who's just a regular princess running on a horse and all sorts of things, the movie. But wait, there's more. General Tarkin shows up, and he's serving the new High Lord of the Hill Tribes. Let's get back to the princess because she's got a special sword. You don't want to know about it here, but I'll tell you one thing, they're taking the Girlboss to Isengard, and what do you do then? It's called War of the Rohirrim. Actually, that's what it's called. Oh, by the way, another instance of the writers not quite remembering what they wrote 5 minutes ago. Before Hera enters the woods, we get this exchange.
Does she know what creature lives in those woods?
Of course she does.
Yet when General Tarkin turns up, he says this.
I never thought I'd live to see such a sight.
So everyone knows what lives in the woods, yet at the same time, it's so impossibly rare that they haven't seen it ever? Anyway, they are indeed taking the Girlboss to Isengard, which, broadly in line with canon, is now run by wild men and Dunlendings under Wulf. Hera has, though, been tracked by Old Leather, Discount Éomer, and Dollar Store Merry, but when Discount Éomer tries to go in to save Hera, he is stopped. This is because Old Leather is in the scene, and she's the only one allowed to have plans that work. Inside Orthanc, Wulf and Hera reacquaint.
You cannot hope to stand against Rohan and Gondor.
Your father will never ask for help from Gondor. His pride will not allow it.
I probably should have mentioned this to your idiot father then, shouldn't you, before he got himself killed because he believed the precise opposite. Wulf, being an incel, is enraged by the sight of a strong, independent woman who doesn't want to sleep with him, so he tells her he's going to kill her brothers, then her father, and then rule Rohan himself, or whatever is left of it. He gives her a small scar to match the one she gave him as a child, then he offers to marry her anyway to avert the war, but then he decides, no, I like Nick Fuentes, women are gay, actually.
The boy you knew is gone, Hera. I am the man your father made me.
This isn't exactly wrong, it's just incredibly flat one-note stuff. I was nice, then bad thing happened, now I am evil. We've just seen pretty much his one and only moment of doubt in the entire movie. He is quite plainly revenge incarnate. It's the only thing there is to say about him. And while that's not broken, the advantage of very simple things is that they are harder to break than complex things, it is also disinteresting. Especially since the movie has dallied with questions of politics and ethics that it simply refuses to address or bring up again. Is Rohan independent or a vassal of Gondor? Is Helm a fit ruler if he disdains those with the wrong blood? Are the Dunlendings evil or hard done by? Do the wild men deserve better? Is Wulf the man to uplift them? All of these things would have made for interesting conversations with plenty of opportunity for character nuance, but we get none of that. This is a 2-hour movie, yet in it we get no more information about the Dunlendings and the wild men than we got from one short scene in the Two Towers.
The horsemen took your band. They drove your people into the hills
to scratch a living off rocks.
Anyway, before Wolf can add to the domestic violence statistics, old Lesser bursts in and says, "That's my job!"
You think you're still a shield maiden, old woman?
But wait, I thought everyone thought the shield maidens were extinct. Their fire had gone out of the universe, etc.
Those were darker days. I've long thought it time to retire that banner.
Whatever. Old Lesser rescues Hera, and with a little bit of help from Discount Eomer, they ride out of Isengard.
I'll dispatch our fastest horseman.
Don't bother. She will outride them.
She's just so good a rider, you see, that she has mastered the art of reducing her weight to 0 so that the 2 people currently riding her horse count as 1 and the 1 can escape pursuit. That is the only possible explanation, because otherwise, no. A horse with 2 people on its back is not outrunning fresher horses with just 1 person on their backs. Abandoning pursuit before it even begins also does nothing to aid a sense of urgency and tells us nothing about Wolf's plans, his tactics, or his character. If the point is that they've been amassing an army in secret, then having their plans exposed before they are ready should cause them no end of stress. A failed pursuit would at least tell us that they valued their secrecy, and Wolf's reaction to that failure would tell us something more about his character and his personality. As it is, this entire kidnap and escape subplot makes surprisingly little difference to subsequent events, which really isn't what you want from a scene that reveals the villain's evil schemes. This is because, in another outbreak of warrior princess trope we were supposed to be trying to avoid, Hera is right in her warnings to her father, but nobody listens to her. This is partly due to the presence of Lord Thorn, Helm Hammerhand's buddy, who is going to have a traitorous turn later, though this is also quite absurd as he basically argues that Mumakil in Rohan has nothing to worry about.
The beast was diseased, you said so yourself. We had reports of a column of Mumakil moving west near our southern border. One of them must have broken its chains and crossed into our lands. It's got nothing to do with the Dunlending boy.
I'm pretty sure Rohan's southern border is a mountain range, so no? You don't typically find Mumakil in the mountains. Helm Hammerhand was also quite recently trying to arrange a marriage between Hera and a Gondorian prince, so also no? Whether in your lands or the lands belonging to people you want to be your allies by marriage, Mumakil in this part of the world is a very big deal, and it's not a good thing. The film is leaning very heavily on the words enemies of Gondor, whom the appendices say were amongst the forces arrayed against the Rohirrim during this period. But the appendices also say that these enemies landed at the mouth of the Isen, and you're not gonna get giant elephants on boats, so no, this should be impossible, and even making the generous assumption that it is possible, it should also concern Helm Hammerhand, and it doesn't. He's just pissed off that Discount Eomer let Hera ride into danger, so he banishes him in order that he can do an Eomer later and ride to the rescue at Helm's Deep, making Helm himself once again unpardonably stupid and unfit to rule. Having banished Discount Eomer, Helm insists on riding out from Edoras to meet Wolf's army in the field. This is also stupid and reckless as he doesn't know the size or the composition of the enemy's forces, and he isn't making any connection between a bunch of Mumakil hovering around their borders and the threat from Dunland, despite one having been compellingly drawn for him by Hera. It teases up for Lord Thorn's betrayal because he promises men to defend their flank who obviously won't turn up, but given Helm is already riding into an elephantine trap, this is all a bit of a hat on a hat. As best I can work out, the non-appearance of Lord Thorn's men doesn't meaningfully sway the battle in any way. They would still have been jump scared by elephants. So the betrayal, like the earlier villainous reveal in Orthanc, really doesn't have anything like the impact on the plot that its mere presence demands. Inevitably, like Eowyn, Hera demands that she be allowed to fight, and inevitably, like Theoden, Helm Hammerhand says nah.
I said no. The line of Helm does not rest on you, Hera. It resides in Haleth, in Hammer.
My brothers can defend their home, but yet I cannot.
Helm Hammerhand really is a womble-brained vegetable, isn't he? His reasoning for not letting Hera fight is that his line does not rest on her, it rests on his sons, whom he is taking to battle, which is all a bit, backwards, isn't it? If you're concerned for the future of your line, you do not put that future on the battlefield. He should have said, if your brothers fall, you will be the last of my house. In other words, no, I can't risk you. Saying I can't risk you because you're unimportant is something fucking Helm tumor brain would say. Moreover, he recommits to finding her a Gondorian prince so that she can live far away and bring up children who, and I quote, know nothing of our ways. So we are once again undercutting the stated reason Gondor will not come to their aid. Why not just keep the actual reason, movie? It was right there in the appendices. They're just too busy.
Wolf's army is 20 leagues from Edoras. They're not setting up camp. They're not resting.
What? They're continuing to advance.
The hill tribes are used to attacking under cover of dark. He means to strike tonight.
Okay, well, that's fine. You're inside a walled city, and if you're Helm and you don't believe they've packed any siege weapons or elephants because you think they're a disorganized mob, well, then they'll break upon your fortress like water upon the— oh, for fuck's sake. You're gonna do a Dothraki charge at them for no reason, aren't you? They saw Game of Thrones Season 8 and they thought, well, they didn't see it because it was too fucking dark, but they liked the idea. We know that little bro is about to get himself killed because he deploys one of those bait lines that lazy writers use in lieu of actual characterization.
Keep this safe for me.
Always.
Maybe, one day, someone will sing ballads of me.
Inexplicably, they kind of will, because you get a mention in the appendices, and yet Hera, who accomplishes so much more than you, everyone just forgets to mention her in their songs. And then they do indeed ride out of their walled city into the night to face off against what they believe is an army of people with no siege weapons who prefer to fight in the night. Is it any wonder this race has shield maidens when all its men are Inside the city, Lord Thorne's inconsequential betrayal is revealed because Dollar Mary just happens to drop a letter which has his seal on it, and Hera just happened to see that same seal on a letter in Isengard because she just happened to be imprisoned in a room with lots of confidential and important letters being left around on the tables. Naturally, if you're playing both sides, if you're a conspirator, of course you put your official seal on letters to the king and the rebels. That's just good practice. It's like leaving a paper trail when you commit fraud or writing down all the lies you plan to tell in court, something any good YouTube lawyer would tell you to do. This revelation prompts Hera to order that the city be evacuated, which I'm not sure she has the authority to do, and which I'm pretty damn sure is unwise given she has no idea of the size, composition, or arrangement of the enemy forces, but can be reasonably sure that plenty of them are mounted and they all want to kill innocent villagers. In the Two Towers, this kind of works because Grima being exposed gives them plenty of warning and surprises Saruman. Saruman is playing catch up. They have time then to get from Edoras to Helm's Deep on foot, and even then they still get waylaid by mounted opponents. But Saruman's army isn't right outside the gates when the order to evacuate is given, because if they were, they probably wouldn't have evacuated, and if they had evacuated, they would all have been killed. Here the same basic idea is in play. There is the threat of a coming army, so they must evacuate, and the Eowyn surrogate will lead the people to Helm's Deep. It's just that in this example, they should all be killed en route because nobody's thought this through. You don't send your peasants out of the city while it's being attacked. This is Age of Empires 101, guys. Out in the field, Helm blows the wrong horn. That is quite clearly the horn of Gondor.
The Horn of Gondor.
This is what a Rohan horn sounds like. It's a little thing, but if you're going to get the horn, it's important you do it right, otherwise, there'll be alimony to pay. The Rohirrim duly doth Raki charge into oncoming fire while old Lesser guides the women and children out of the city, and Lord Thorne tries to murder Hera but gets taken out by her horse. I really don't know what he was trying to achieve here, or indeed why he's here, rather than enacting a more consequential betrayal on the battlefield. Could have been like the King's Men turning on Ned Stark in the first season of Game of Thrones, but it's fine, he's dead now, so it doesn't matter. Hera then decides to set the walls of Edoras on fire for some reason. I don't know what she was trying to achieve here. I mean, it temporarily scares some Mumakil when they go to knock the walls down, but if the goal was to stop them destroying the city, I don't think burning the city down was the best way to go about it. She had to destroy the city in order to save it. Women, am I right? And also Vietnam War generals. Speaking of the battlefield, Wolf leads his Mumakil against Helm Hammerhand, as is sung of in no songs whatsoever. Older brother takes a Mumakil out single-handedly with his axe, and then he gets shot through the neck and dies, which was equivalently unworthy of verse. Helm gets shot, but it's not time for him to die yet. Hera, who is still not a warrior princess, of course, warrior princesses her way past several goons and rescues him, and they all ride off. This is the moment where little bro's horse has its asthma attack and he gets himself captured. The villagers, meanwhile, somehow walk 60 miles to Helm's Deep overnight, and somehow they all get there before Wolf and his riders catch them up. Wolf executes little bro in front of Helm. All the archers on the walls forget what they're there for, so nobody tries to take him out, and we settle down for a protracted and disinteresting siege, which Helm, for the most part, sleeps through. Now, it is not my intention to cut this video short. If you're familiar with this channel, you know I don't do short things. In fact, if this video comes in at under an hour, I will consider it a YouTube short. But the next third of the movie is really unspeakably dull, and it being unspeakable makes it rather difficult to, speak about. Wolf rules over a completely burned out Edoras for a couple of scenes to look cool, and prepares to assault the walls at Helm's Deep, while in Helm's Deep, everybody gets very cold. There's an old crone for some reason. She's in the movie, mostly to do a bit of witchy foreshadowing of Hera's climactic change of outfit.
Oh, don't touch that, my lady. That gown was made for a bride that was pledged to the captain of the keep, but she never got to wear it. A strange fever took her the night before her wedding. Some say many a lost soul wanders these halls, and worse.
Who says it?
I do.
What makes you think she's a witch? Well, she turned me into a newt. A newt. I got better.
I don't have a clue what they were going for here at all. I mean, she just changes her dress later in a bit to remind Wolf that he's an incel, I think. That's the payoff. And they wanted a general air of mysticism and myth and darkness for their movie, and they thought, well, I mean, Shakespeare had old crones, didn't he? Let's have an old crone, that's a good idea. You may be asking yourself, well, now they're in Helm's Deep shit, surely they'll ask for aid. But no, they can't, you see, because, as Dollar Store Mary explains, all their messenger birds are shot out of the sky by the enemy's very skilled archers that we'll never see again. As for why they don't try throwing the birds in the other direction over the mountains, or indeed taking the secret passage out and launching the birds from the other side, or indeed taking the secret passage out and riding for help in person, well, shut up. Hera has a different plan in mind. It's just not ready for her to do that yet. Speaking of Hera, she of course is the one who keeps everybody together while the men despair. Beyond the walls and outside in Archer's range, Wolf's men are building an enormous siege tower. This probably wouldn't have been much use against the Hornberg itself, as the rocky outcrop at its base prevents a tower getting that close to it, but against the Deeping Wall it's a viable tactic, and it's the Deeping Wall that gives you access to the actual Helm's Deep, which is the valley that leads to the Glittering Caves and then through that into the mountains. This sadly is the second movie adaptation that has completely forgotten about the existence of Helm's Dyke, which is a shame because, I could have got a joke out of that. So anyway, Helm's Dyke explains that Helm Hammerhand himself has been diagnosed with a severe case of the Padmes, and he is currently dying of SAD. In case we were unsure on this point, Hera gracefully smacks us in the face with it.
I know this sickness is not born of any mortal wound. It is grief that pulls you under. Grief that you will never again see your sons
At this point, we come once more, however briefly, into line or thereabouts with the lore, as at night, Helm Hammerhand wakes up and he goes about murdering Dunlendings with his bare hands, and they come to regard him as an evil wraith.
Whispers spread that Helm Hammerhand was human no more. He bore no weapon, and no weapon could smite him. A terror, born of madness and grief. A wraith.
That's a myth! Why are you trying to start a myth? It's a prehistoric planet, Morty. Someone has to bring a little culture.
This probably is the film at its atmospheric high point, as the blizzards and the flames quivering in the darkness and the horn blowing before the wraith attacks all work, for the most part, to give the movie something of its Norse character. This is almost certainly the reason Old Crone exists as well, because she gets to tell creepy stories and generally haunt the halls of the Hornburg.
A terrible, unholy sight. Eyes that burn like coals as he feasts on the flesh.
Helm Hammerhand is no wraith.
Then how did he disappear from a locked and guarded room? Answer me that.
I don't know, but I do know he can't walk through walls.
Perhaps he can. Perhaps he can do many unnatural things.
Oh, aye? Such as what?
First comes the sound of the horn. 3 blasts. Then he appears, fierce and gaunt, stalking his prey.
The only ghoul haunting these halls is you.
Hera finds the secret passage through which Helm escapes his locked room at night in pretty much the next scene though, so the movie counters its own sense of magic and mystery after about 30 seconds. The passage leads out of the fortress and into a frozen clearing in the mountains where the film decides, once again, to be stupid.
Orcs. Orders from on high.
What does Mordor want with rings anyway?
So, leaving aside that it is quite silly having a passageway leading directly into the heart of your fortress, because if anybody knew about it, and we are running with the assumption that Wolf knows nothing either about the fortress or the glittering caves or the way out of the deep behind them, well, then this would make it a massive vulnerability, wouldn't it? But we are also expected to believe that Sauron has orcs up in the White Mountains just randomly collecting any rings they can find to take back to Mordor, because you know, rings are the kind of thing you find high up in the mountains. Hell, while we're at it, I'm pretty sure Sauron isn't even in Mordor at this time. War of the Rohirrim is set, I think, around the year 2759 of the Third Age. Sauron, as the Necromancer, is in Dol Guldur in Mirkwood until the White Council drives him out at around the year 2941. So if the orcs are taking the rings to Mordor on Sauron's orders, they are doing so a couple of 100 years too early. Saruman, searching for the One Ring, wisely looks for the location of Isildur's death, which prompts him to search the Anduin near the Gladden Fields for the likely resting place of the One Ring. This is called working smarter. If Sauron really has little teams of orcs operating under the instructions, look for any ring, anywhere, lost at any point, then it's no fucking wonder he couldn't find it. Now, this beat is really just here so they could chuck it in the trailers in a bit to trick people that there might be something worth seeing in this movie, which is not a sign of confidence because it suggests the writers themselves didn't find that much to captivate them about this place and this time period. The orcs sniff the air and they think, that smells implausibly flawless and perfect and strong. Must be a woman about. And she's grabbed by this large but nondescript creature. Fortunately, the writers have taken some inspiration from Arcane Season 2, so Helm Hammerhand randomly lands on them from a great height and a fight commences. I confess I did wonder whether the film was doing some half-decent work with symbolism here. Helm Hammerhand versus the monster he is becoming, that kind of thing. It wouldn't be a bad metaphor, Helm sliding into madness but being brought back to himself when he witnesses his daughter in danger, so defeating the monster he would otherwise have become. But then Hera basically kills it for him, so fuck that I guess. Almost 90 minutes into the movie and the only notable character killed by Helm Hammerhand was an unarmed fat. What an epic character. Inner and outer demons defeated, Helm apologizes for not listening to his wise, clever, brave, tough, brilliant, charming daughter.
You can't tear Wolf's army apart one man at a time.
I can try. I should have listened to you. You're brave and clever and stronger than I knew.
and I was blind not to see it. I failed you. All of you.
Correct. I'm so glad we got the pathetic moron version of Helm rather than the fierce and vengeful, unbowed and unbent one from canon. Here he is on his knees before a warrior prince, a well-drawn and complex female character, as is the proper place for a king of Rohan. The noise of their battle attracts unwanted attention, so they have to run all the way down out of the mountains and around to the fortress's front gate, because, they came through a one-way tunnel? But if that's true, then how was Helm getting in and out over the various nights without people spotting him coming back through the front door? Anyway, they'll have to be sneaky and quiet to get around without alerting all those excellent archers who shot all their messenger birds like we were told about a few minutes ago, right? Oh, never mind then. The doors are, alas, frozen stiff. During all this time, Helm and Hera are pursued only by the small team led by Wolf. The rest of his massive army is completely unaware, I assume because they ran out of time to animate them. That's actually quite a consistent problem throughout this movie. It really struggles to convey any sense of scale except at long distance. The minute you close in, large battles seem to consist of no more than 3 or 4, maybe 5 at a push people. And entire armies can disappear, as in this scene, because, if they hadn't disappeared, they might have got in the way, and we can't be having that. Pathetic Helm Hammerhand cannot pull the gates open, but with the awesome added strength of Hera and old Lesser, they open them just wide enough to sneak Hera through. Helm, though, is too large, so he gets a final stand of sorts in front of the fortress gates, during which time absolutely nobody in the fortress thinks it might be worth getting up on the walls and helping him out by shooting at his attackers.
Rohan still needs you.
No, Hera. They need you. You must lead them now.
I can't.
You can. My pride. My joy. You could rule the world.
Oh, fuck off, Helm. To be as fair as possible, the movie does allow Helm Hammerhand to go out as a warrior, and his ending is a broad strokes approximation of the canonical one. Just a shame about most of what got us here, really. In some alternate dimension, this was the final scene of a movie in which he was the main character, but this is Earth Dimension bleh. So we've still got about half an hour left to go in which Hera can steal the imprimatur from her father's cold, dead fingers. There is a funeral, and the Rohirrim lower the flag over Helm's Deep, signifying the king's death. Outside, General Tarkin believes this means they have won, so they can all pack up and go home, even though leaving a sizable loyalist faction alive and in possession of your greatest fortress probably isn't a wise strategic move. Oh, and fuck, at the moment, it's pretty much the only fortress of note in the entire region. Edoras is a burnt-out wreck at this point. Something else they forgot to mention in their songs. But Wolf helpfully reminds us of his one personality trait.
I cannot leave! Don't you understand? This is all I have. Without vengeance, this will have been for nothing.
No. We cannot show weakness. Not to her.
Oh my god, it's all about fucking her. Just stop it, movie. Why not have a more interesting version of this scene, where he tries to seize on a new weakness to press his marriage claim once again, and so legitimize himself as the new ruler of Rohan? He could ride up to the gates and demand she accept his hand and be his queen, and he will let her people live. She could teeter on the verge of accepting his offer to spare her people, but be pulled back from it by the people themselves, whose loyalty to Helm passes down to her, confirming her place as heir in spirit, earned via the good deeds she's done by them. Having Wolf just insist on going to war because he wants vengeance and she's the only one left to take it out against is just really dull. It's so dull. We get a brief and irritating scene where Hera pretends she has doubts and old Lesser gives her a generic moral lesson.
I'm afraid, Olwyn. I cannot save them.
Perhaps not, but there is something you can do. You can choose. You ask who would come if you called for aid. Rohan would answer. People need hope, Hera. Something to believe in, no matter how out of reach it may be. So you can wait and worry, or you can choose.
You can choose how this ends.
My version of this scene is stronger. The you can choose moral lesson, which will recur later when she abandons her people and toddles off on an adventure rather than ruling them as their queen, is spiritually empty. Where's the self-sacrifice? Where's the duty and the obligation? Where is the operation of grace, the divine reward for good character manifesting itself in the world? It's not about your choice, darling. It's about the people.
Ride out and meet them. For death and glory. For Rohan. For your people.
No, sod it. You slay queen or whatever the fuck we're doing here. That's much better. And then an eagle turns up. Dollarstorm Mary brings Hera her father's armor and helm because you see she has a cunning plan. Perfect? It will be when it fits a woman. Okay, no, we're not doing that. What we are doing is A, attempting to show Rings of Power how it's done, and therefore B, something very silly, as Hera scales the icy mountain walls to meet an eagle that conveniently lives right above the fortress, which gives us a very funny musical cue. She asks the eagle to take Helm's helm to discount Éomer so he can wear it and rally the Rohirrim to her aid. Princesses asking eagles to send dead king's armor to anointed heir in a bid to save Helm's Deep. No, that's also not something they thought to sing about in their songs. Wolf, meanwhile, has a dumb plan of his own. There is dissension in the ranks, you see, so he promises his army all the gold in the Hornburg.
What are you doing? The Hornburg has never been used to store gold.
But they don't know that, do they?
Yeah, so he's now just on a self-destruction arc, right? He's doomed either way, but he doesn't care because he's just really, really angry. It's like they looked at Kylo Ren and thought, yeah, let's do that. The eagle arrives at Dunharrow while the siege tower is completed and begins its advance on the walls of Helm's Deep.
Is there no other way for the women and children to get out of the caves?
There is one passage. It leads into the mountains.
If we can clear the secret tunnel, our people can reach the mountain pass.
But they will not get far. The Uruk-hai are too many.
It's too risky. Wolf will see us.
Ride out with me. Ride out and meet them.
No, he won't. Because his eye will be fixed on me.
Kind of baffling, isn't it, how Hera knows she is the only thing Wolf wants, yet she's never once considered giving herself up to him to save her people. Bit of an indictment of her moral character, don't you think? She sends Dollarstorm Mary off with a couple of able-bodied but male, therefore useless soldiers to lead the women and children off into the mountains, which they didn't consider trying before for reasons. And she and old Leza prepare to Xena their way to the conclusion. Does that scan, Xena, because she was a warrior princess and they insisted that that's not what Hera... Well, fuck it. Anyway, remember the wedding dress scene we had earlier for no apparent reason? Well, here's the payoff.
He wanted a bride, and so a bride he shall have.
So yeah, she's not even gonna try to appeal to his better nature. Her plan is to enrage him by reminding him that he is an incel who has been pre-cucked by an old lesbian.
Why are you laughing?
Because I get to choose.
Choose what? We've not seen a single meaningful choice moment in this movie. Everybody knew this is what you were going to do because it's been blindingly obvious from your very first scene that you are a warrior princess. I get to choose indeed. What the fuck are you, Star Wars outlaws?
And I choose not to be afraid.
Right, strong child.
What the fuck is the crone doing in the scene? Has she been on some kind of arc that I've just missed? Why are we doing this? How is not being afraid the choice they wanted her to make? Why are there no characters in the movie? Dollarstorm Mary gives us our Shield Maidens payoff beat.
Have you ever heard of the Shield Maidens?
No.
They were women of the Borderlands.
You what now?
When all the soldiers had died, they took up arms. They defended Rohan when no one else could. Some believe they're all gone now.
Are they?
Not all of them.
I didn't realize when all the men were gone included being sent away so the writers could lady goon over their goon ladies. There are able-bodied men, soldiers even, still alive here, but they're the ones who've been sent away with the civilians. They are in the position of shield maidens in this movie, or shield bros I guess we might call them, which seems to me to miss the entire point of the shield maiden as represented by Éowyn. And once again, they're all in this position because Hera hasn't even considered giving herself up. Éowyn learns the value of self-sacrifice in a way Hera never will. So Hera dons the dress and rides off into battle against the world's least practical siege tower. You realize the point of a tower is to straddle the wall, right? What you've done here is build a siege bridge, and I'm pretty sure that would have snapped right down the middle if you tried it in real life, but hey-ho. Hera rides onto the bridge. Somehow Wolf gets a horse all the way up the siege tower so they can sit across from each other.
You come before me as a bride. You think after everything I would marry you.
I am bride to no man.
Oh, go back to the shadow, you insufferable bint. For some reason, Wolf is initially reluctant to fight her, even though killing her is the sole reason he remains here.
Tell me then, to whom are you pledged?
Death. Let us end this, Wolf, as it began, with you and I. If I best you in combat, you let my people go.
Why would I agree to such terms? You have nothing to offer me!
You may wear a crown upon your head, but that does not make you a king. I am the last of the true bloodline of Rohan. I offer you a chance to prove yourself worthy of that throne. You were too much of a coward to face my father. So face me now.
The girl is clever. She is up to something. Do not take the bait.
I accept your challenge!
I guess it's sometimes hard to remember your one character trait. So they have a fight. General Tarkin orders the rest of the army to stand back so they don't get in the way or eat into the animation budget. And there's really not much to be said about the duel itself, save that, as you would expect, Hera wins it easily and does a hero pose. The movie can't even be bothered to pretend that she's in danger. It does nothing to suggest this fight is especially difficult for her. The fight doesn't have an act structure, it just occurs and she wins. She tells Wolf to call off his attack, as does General Tarkin, but Wolf says nah and stabs Tarkin, who unwisely chose not to evacuate in his moment of triumph.
With or without honor, men bleed just the same.
So edgy, bro. Well done. He commands his men to attack the fortress, and of course they all just run around the pretty woman in a sexy dress, because though they are wild barbarians, they're not like that. But oh no, they didn't count on there being two undefeatable women. They don't want to shag the other one either, because it's old Lesser, and she easily holds the bridge against the onrushing hordes, while a few nameless men shoot fire arrows at it. The bridge is wooden, and it's been made during a blizzard and has spent almost all of its time covered in snow, so naturally it is highly flammable. Things at no point look bleak, and so to nobody's relief at all, suddenly an eagle swoops down to herald the arrival of Discount Éomer and his loyal riders, and they pull a suitably cheap rendition of actual Éomer's charge from two towers, sweeping down the hill.
Our people do not call this keep the Hornburg anymore. They have named it for its true king, Helm's Deep.
Who's Deep? Oh, the old guy who got a few minutes screen time. I remember him. Funny idea naming a place after that guy rather than the woman who actually saved everyone. Gosh darn, but I do hate sexism. The Dunlendings flee before the advancing enemy, and Wolf kneels before Hera. She's already seen him sneak attack General Tarkin with a knife, but for the sake of dragging out the runtime, she forgets that she saw this, so he sneak attacks her in turn and is, repelled?
You missed.
Old Lesser does a Captain America and lobs her shield to Hera, and Hera uses it to choke Wolf to death, because it turns out he has the lung capacity of a man with no lungs. And that's it. Wolf is dead. The Dunlendings run away. Hera tells Viscount Aemma to show mercy and let them return to their families, thereby ensuring the deaths of many innocent women and children later on. Speaking of later on, the Rohirrim have begun rebuilding Edoras, which, with hindsight, Hera burned down for no obvious gain. Viscount Aemma is now the king, and among his first acts is receiving a state visit from a cameo.
Saruman the White.
If he should ever be in need of assistance, my lord.
That's kind of it. That's all he says. Later, Viscount Aemma expresses the writer's frustration with the source material.
It should have been you, Hera.
I never wanted a crown. It was always meant for others.
Even so, you would have worn it well.
But you see, Hera has more important things to do. She has somehow, at some point, for some reason, received a message, you see. A message from a very important person.
We ride for the fords of Iceland to meet a wizard. He has questions about the orcs I encountered in the rings they were stealing.
Oh, aye. And, does this wizard have a name?
He has many. But in the common tongue, he's simply known as Gandalf.
How? Why? When? At what point did Gandalf learn there were orcs looking for rings? The only witnesses to that event were Hera and Helm is dead, so he can't have summoned Hera to talk about the rings unless he'd already met her and learned about it from her, no? Why, after everything she's just been through, would she even find the rings element of the orcs' presence at all noteworthy? She isn't, or she shouldn't be, pre-programmed with the knowledge that rings are especially significant. Moreover, why would Gandalf find this especially interesting, given he doesn't discover that the One Ring is in play for a few hundred years? If Saruman had asked, it might have been a different matter, as Saruman had a particular interest in ringcraft. But for Gandalf to be asking, he must have a stronger interest here than he has in The Hobbit, say, or even the beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring, both of which occur later. We're taking some pretty significant liberties with canon here for what is, after all, just an empty reference, a shallow attempt to tie this to a different and better story. So Hera and old Leza ride off together while Eowyn proper reads this out.
Her name was Hera, the only daughter of Helm. Wild, some called her, headstrong and free, and so she remained to the end of her days.
And I licked her asshole a little bit. It was pretty good. It was all right. It wasn't great.
And that's it. That's the end. And what a terrifically bland movie it was. The word Girlboss genuinely doesn't escape my lips that often, but there is no other word to describe our protagonist here. She has the distinction of being the most pronounced but hardly the most well-drawn of all the characters. Her arc is a flat line, from precociously talented and fierce wise warrior who is always right, to precociously talented and fierce wise warrior who was always right. Almost every other character is equivalently monotone. Wolf, jealous boy whose affections are spurned, and who then resolves to become vengeance, in the sense that vengeance is his sole motive and sole characteristic. Old Leza, who begins as a skilled and loyal warrior friend and ends as a skilled and loyal warrior friend. Viscount Aemma, what even is there to say about him? He spends most of the movie absent from the movie and returns to take the throne because no one else wants it. The only character with something resembling a journey is Helm Hammerhand, and that journey is not flattering. Despite being the subject of that section of the appendices from which Rohirrim is drawn, he is reduced to mere error in the adaptation. His childishly rash stubbornness leads him from catastrophic mistake to catastrophic mistake, putting his people at grave risk of extinction. And they still named a fucking valley after him. Having lost a war, his capital city, his army, his sons, and his nephew by assorted mongoloid behaviors, he briefly becomes a vengeful monster, and his redemptive act at the close is to get himself killed in an act that doesn't meaningfully alter the story in any way. He didn't stop people getting through the gate, it was already shut. He saved no lives by his sacrifice. He turned no tides. He might as well have died of sad for all the good his redemption did, because this wasn't his story, it was Hera's, and yet still, they couldn't be bothered to give her a character. There's no world building to speak of, save assorted details that don't really add up to any coherent whole. Helm simultaneously wants to make Gondor his ally, yet will not countenance allying with them for help. There is no mention of Gondor itself being at war, yet Mumakil wandering south of and into Rohan is no cause for alarm, apparently. Why would men of Harad from the far east ally with the Dunlendings from Isengard all the way over in the west? How was that arrangement ever struck? What did they hope to gain from it? With what were they paid? What was promised to them? How did they get their fucking elephants on boats? The Dunlendings themselves are given no character or race trait or political or territorial objective, despite being the movie's antagonistic faction. We learn nothing more about them than we already knew from their couple of scenes in the Jackson trilogy, where they are quick to enact vengeance on Saruman's instructions in spite, or perhaps because of, Hera letting them all live at the end of this movie. Rightio, well done Hera. Then we have orcs searching places they shouldn't for rings that have no business being in the uninhabited White Mountains, under orders from Mordor despite Mordor being empty because Sauron's nowhere near it because he lives in Dol Guldur at the moment. Then we have Saruman, who is interested in ringcraft, turning up at the close and saying nothing about rings, while Gandalf, who isn't interested in ringcraft, writes a letter inquiring after events he can't know about in service of an investigation he won't start for several centuries. It will be a stretch to say the movie has a theme besides girls can be fierce and free. In fact, you know what? Why the fuck are we still here? We are clearly putting much more thought into the movie than the writers did. I would hate to give the impression I care about it more than the studio does. This is the filmic equivalent of a German man putting a beach towel on a deck chair to annoy less punctual people. Corporate movie number beyond reckoning. It's Christmas, apparently. Go drink and be merry. Find something better to watch. Watch fucking Elf, I don't know. Just don't watch this one. This is pointless. Ho ho ho, etc. I will see you soon.